Good afternoon. This is GrantCameron, and this is an update called UFOs and Henry Kissinger. The idea for this update came from a interview I did with dark journalists a little while ago, and this is a story I intended to tell on the broadcast, but didn't get to tell it. It has to do with the story that dark journalist was dealing with the undercover agent Robert Merrick, who claimed that he had had a conversation with President Nixon and that Nixon had given him a letter to move to Henry Kissinger. Also told him that he had put a time capsule in the White House and that Merrick knew where it was. And now the story is that Merrick has a lawyer who has contacted the National Archives, and they have challenged the National Archives to allow a search of the White House to take place, and Merrick will show them where the time capsule is, and it has to do with the UFO phenomena and the truth behind it. The letter that Merrick was supposed to take was to be taken to Henry Kissinger. And so I'm going to tell a story that I knew about Henry Kissinger. It's kind of an interesting story, and I have actually written it up on my website, which I'll show in a second, but some of it centers around this book called Prospect for America, which is sort of the post-World War II concept of the world by the Rockefeller panel. And Henry Kissinger actually ran this panel. When it comes to UFOs, Henry Kissinger had stated that the UFO subject was the biggest hot potato ever. We were never able to confirm where he said it, but the story has been around for years that he actually made this statement. As I said, this story I'm going to tell today is basically part of a longer article I wrote called The Story of the Falcon. And we will provide the link for that article, and you can sort of see that I had told this story before. So here's the story. It has to do with a phone conversation I had on December 24th, 1988 with Bill Steinman. Bill Steinman was a very aggressive UFO researcher in the 1980s. And what's important to the story is he's very good friends with Bill Moore. I knew Steinman for quite a while, and then at one point he had a number of things that sort of upset him about the UFO community, and he just one day up and quit and never did come back. He had tremendous numbers of files, but was very aggressive at doing research, at phoning people, and he was famously known for writing the book UFO Crash at Aztec, a well-kept secret. And so while he was researching this book, he was trying to track down a number of the people that he believed were involved in the crash, MJ-12 type people who were involved in the keeping of the secret in the late 1940s. He's also well known for being the man who discovered Dr. Eric Walker. I've written about Dr. Eric Walker quite a bit. I led a team of researchers who tried to contact Dr. Walker in the 1980s. And Walker was the former chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis. He ran a Navy torpedo lab at Penn State University. He was the president at Penn State University for 15 years. He was chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis. And in the photograph here, he was the executive director of the Research and Development Board, which was the group that the Canadian government pointed to as being the place where the UFO secret was being held. It was where all weapon research was being done by the U.S. military. So Walker was discovered in 1987 by Bill Steinman. Then Bill Steinman pulled out, and I continued this investigation of Dr. Walker and what he knew about the UFO subject. So that's the sort of the background on Bill Steinman. He's not around anymore, but he was very, very well known in the 1980s. what happens is during this investigation that he was doing of Walker and of the crash material, because Dr. Walker had confirmed to Bill Steinman that he had been at a series of briefings that had occurred at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1950, dealing with the recovery of a crashed flying saucer. And when Steinman was doing the research, one of the people that he came up with, I'm not exactly sure how he got this name, but Dr. Eric Wang was one of the people that he was investigating. And Dr. Wang was the head of special studies department at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Wang taught engineering at the University of Cincinnati and also worked at the Wright Air Development Center from 1949 to 1956. And it was from 1952 to 1956 that Wang ran this special studies unit. And in 1956, this unit was moved from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to Kirkland Air Force Base and Sandia Complex in 1956. And Walker ran this special studies unit. People will immediately recognize Kirkland Air Force Base is the place where Richard Doty and a number of other people were stationed. And the story that's now put out, the possibly fake news story, is that there was no UFOs going on at Kirkland Air Force Base. Nothing going on here. Don't look behind the curtain. No UFOs. This is all a big plan by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations to mislead people on satellite research they were doing, that the Russians had been using pulsed laser beams to their satellites, and that the research being done at Kirkland Air Force Base was to throw the satellites off and send them in different directions. And that's what they were covering. There was no UFOs. But you can see now that that may have actually been a disinformation, because it was called Project Rainbow, supposedly. And if you look up Project Rainbow, it's now sort of been outed, had nothing to do with satellites whatsoever. So this is the story that in 1956, this special studies unit dealing with crashed UFOs goes to Kirkland Air Force Base. And so Wang runs it from 1956 to 1960, and he dies in 1960. Steinman's on the case, and what he basically does is he gets in contact with Wang's wife, Maria Wang, and he starts a series of conversations and phone calls with her. And that's the way Steinman was. Once he got somebody in his sights, he was very, very aggressive. He would not give up. Once he realized he had somebody, he thought he knew what was going on. So he contacts Maria Wang, and here's from one of the transcripts of some of the material that he provided to me, and it's in his book. Here's a part of a conversation that he had with Mrs. Wang. Steinman says, "I wrote you on March 23rd regarding Dr. Eric Wang and his work involving an analysis on recovered flying saucers and attempted duplication of them." So Mrs. Wang says, "Yes, I do remember the letter, but I no longer have it," and turned it over to the authorities, the military intelligence at Kirkland Air Force Base. So Steinman asked her, "Can you tell me something about Wang's involvement in the flying saucer program?" And she said, "How did you know Dr. Wang was involved in that kind of work? Why do you want to know about that? Who are you? How do I know that I can trust you?" So Maria Wang actually, as she opens up, actually confirms that if he really wants to know what's going on, she really can't help him too much, that he should actually talk to Dr. Henry Kissinger. And she stated that she had met Kissinger many times in her husband's study, and that Kissinger was the one that was running the program, the entire program that Wang was working on dealing with crash flying saucers. He was there as the head of the Rockefeller-funded Special Studies Project. And as you can see, when now we check, there actually was a Rockefeller Special Studies Project between 1956 and 1960, and it was actually run by Henry Kissinger. And there was a bunch of panels, and they produced this book that I showed early on, that looked at foreign policy for the U.S., economics, where the U.S. government should go post-World War II, and how everything should be set up and established. And Kissinger ran the program, and she had identified him as the head of this program in 1956, and that the flying saucer stuff was involved. This is Rockefeller here, Nelson Rockefeller, who actually was the one that was set it up, and here's Henry Kissinger. And what you will sort of note here as well is that the Cutler-Twining memo, famous memo, is also called the MJ-12 Special Studies Project. And it was written in 1954, which is basically the same time period. And you'll see it's marked top secret restricted, which is the UFO working group has the same top secret restricted category. So this conversation starts taking place with Wang, Miss Maria Wang, and Steinman. And 2 days after the phone conversation, where Steinman is told about Henry Kissinger, Bill Steinman gets a phone call from Bill Moore. Now, they were very close friends, and according to Steinman, he would follow Bill Moore's tracks. Bill Moore had lots of sources, and Steinman knew enough to listen carefully to who he was talking about, and he would try to follow the same track and talk to the same people that Bill Moore was talking to. And Bill Moore had as many as 24 of these sources. So he phones up, Bill Moore phones him up, and he asks Bill Steinman, "Why are you bugging Mrs. Wang?" And Steinman asks him, "How do you know that?" And so Bill Moore replied, "I have intelligence sources." And Steinman becomes very upset about this whole thing, that somehow Bill Moore knows exactly what's going on. So Moore actually then asked Bill Steinman, he said, "Have you talked to Dorothy at the library?" And later Bill Steinman confirmed, identified it as Dorothy McKinnon, who was at the Kirkland Air Force Base Library, who I guess Bill Moore was dealing with her as well. And he said no, he had not dealt with her, just with Mrs. Wang. So Moore then began to recount parts of the conversation between Steinman and Mrs. Wang. And Bill, of course, Bill Steinman actually demanded how he had access to this, because Bill was actually identifying specific parts of the conversation that had occurred on the telephone. So Bill said, "If you want to know, come over to my house tomorrow night and I'll explain it to you." And this is the story that Bill Moore told. Bill Moore stated that while he was at university, the CIA was recruiting on American campuses. Moore was approached by the CIA to work for them. And we all know that Bill Moore was fluent in Russian. He could speak and write Russian. And what he stated, that he was approached by the CIA to work for them. Moore told Steinman that he didn't want to work for the CIA, but that he did some footwork for them and wrote a couple of reports for the CIA. And this is what Bill Steinman told me in 1988. So Bill stated that when he became an active research writer dealing with UFOs, he renewed the ties he had with the CIA. And in Bill Moore's words, he is using the CIA, not the CIA using him, but he is using the CIA. He claimed to Bill Steinman that that's how he got access to all his deep throat sources. And a number of the people that Bill Steinman actually tracked after that, and there's one other here that I may bring up in the future that has never been made public, another name, but Bill mentioned a number of names. Some of them were Ronald Blackburn, Dr. Henry Monteith, and these were people that Bill was dealing with at Kirkland and at other places that Bill Steinman actually followed up on to find out what was going on. That Bill Moore had a lot of very good sources, and Steinman was working off these sources as well. So we have Bill then as having this contact with the CIA, having been recruited at university. And then it was later on, there was always the question of his partner. As you know, the MJ-12 document was released in 1984 came in the mail to the man in the middle of the picture here, Jamie Chandray. Now, Jamie Chandray was a nobody. I was there when this happened. Jamie Chandray was a film producer, TV guy in Los Angeles. Didn't seem to have any UFO background, any interest, whatever. And suddenly he appears as the three-man team that's investigating the MJ-12 document. There's Stanton Friedman, Bill Moore, and Jamie Chandray. And it's Jamie Chandray who receives the film in his mailbox. And everybody's always questioned, why did Jamie Chandray get the film in his mailbox rather than Bill Moore? So Bill Moore identifies this is the MJ-12 document. And Bill Moore identifies the fact that later on, he basically states that he believed that Chandray was also CIA. He talks about a meeting that they had with CIA people and others. And this, according to Bill, after it ended, we were standing around talking. And one of the agency guys looked at me and said, "You're new here," but pointing to Chandray, we've known about him for a while. And apparently he had done some sort of work the Vietnam War, according to an interview that Bill had done in just after 2000, but basically pointed the fact that Chandray had intelligence connections as well. And you see this sort of pattern that the DIA, all the sort of military, whether it's Office of Naval Intelligence or Air Force Office of Special Intelligence, whatever, the DIA is at the top of the pyramid. They collect all the material, and it's the CIA that actually does the managing of the story, the disclosure efforts, the cover up, the managing of the story. And so you have Bill having this possible CIA connection and Jamie Chandray. And then later on, Bill Moore identifies the Falcon, who basically ran the whole operation of the 24 sources and the UFO cover-up live and all the material that he was getting, that the whole thing was ran by Harry Rositzke, who was a counterintelligence brought out of retirement CIA, very famous counterintelligence agent who actually ran the program. So you see the CIA connection there. The other one that was identified as the Falcon, and this was done by Robert Collins, and I believe Richard Doty also claims that this is the actual real Falcon was Richard Helms, who was CIA director for Nixon, that Helms was the key guy. And so you have the CIA connection there as well. And the other one is when you get to the managing the story. When I was doing the Dark Journalist, I was just telling the story of Robert Emenegger and the contact that he had been given in the 1970s to do a UFO documentary. And they produced this UFO Past, Present, and Future documentary and book in 1975, where they talked about the channeling of an alien at this top secret CIA building and the Holloman Air Force Base film. And Bob reported there as well that during the entire filming of the project, when they were actually doing the filming, there was actually a CIA agent around all the time. And one of the key people, the guy who actually gave him the story on the channeling of the alien at the National Photographic Interpretation Center, this CIA building, was actually Arthur Lundahl. And Arthur Lundahl was a very famous CIA guy who ran the National Photographic Interpretation Center, where they analyzed all the U-2, the SR-71, and all the spy photographs. And it was actually Art Lundahl who was helping on this documentary. So this is the story. You have the situation. Henry Kissinger has this long background that goes back. This is a story that I haven't told for many, many years. He has the background, and it just gives some sort of support to the story that's being told about the time capsule with Richard Nixon and the involvement of Henry Kissinger. Thanks for listening.